جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Jazakallah, brother, for that beautiful recitation. Now we're going to move on to the second part of our program, which will be the commencement of Dua Kamal. So if I could please ask our brother Ali Hussein to please come on and unmute yourself to begin the recitation. Jazakallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائحي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك. ظلمته نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فادح من البلاء أقلته وكم من عثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد أملي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي. يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك ألا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك، أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي، ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي، فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء، فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك، وخالفت بعض أوامرك، فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك، ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك، وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك. وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي، معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا، لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني، ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري، غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من شد وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي، هبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي. يا إلهي وسيدي وربي، أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك، وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك، ولهج به لساني من ذكرك، واعتقده ضميري من حبك، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات، أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته، أو تبعد من أدنيته، أو تشرد من آويته، أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي، أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة، وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة، وبشكرك مادحة، وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة، وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة، وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعة، وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة. ما هكذا الظن بك، ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا رب، وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها، وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه، قليل مكثه، يسير بقاؤه، قصير مدته. فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه، ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك. وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أضج وأبكي؟ لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته؟ فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك؟ وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك؟ أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك؟ فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين. يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي. فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه؟ أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك. فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما. لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأن تجل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما. أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته أو إحسان فضلته أو بر نشرته أو رزق بسطته أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي يا من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب قوي على خدمتك جوارحي واشتد على العزيمة جوانحي وحبلي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في البارزين وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرده ومن كادني فكده واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجد لي بجودك واعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأقلني عثرتي واغفر زلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة فإليك يا رب نصبت وجهي وإليك يا رب مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غناء ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النقم يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم يا عالما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بما أنت أهله وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا. سورة مباركة الفاتحة.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Jazakallah, brother, for that beautiful recitation. If we can all recite a loud salawat for his tawfiqat, inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Just a couple of announcements before we move on. As you do know, we rely on your generous donations to maintain our center and conduct programs. So we request you to please donate generously to support and sponsor any upcoming events at your center. A second announcement is also the Qaim campaign for the building fund is open, and we're accepting donations for Al Zahra building project. We request to please donate generously and help Al Zahra secure a permanent home. Al Zahra also has ijazah to collect Sahmi Imam homes for the building project. Thirdly, we also request the community to please sign up for the 2021 membership as soon as possible. All the information is available online at www.alzahra.ca. That is spelled ALZAHRA.ca. You can also contact any board of director or officer in the case of any query. And of course, all monetary contributions towards Al Zahra will be eligible for tax receipts. I guess, and one of the last announcements that we have is, inshallah, we will plan to reopen our center and celebrate the wiladat of Imam Muhammad Taqi alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. On Sunday, 21st February, and Brother Ghulam Abbas will address the mahfil. On Wednesday as well, 24th of February 2021, we will celebrate the wiladat of Imam Ali alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And Syed Hassan Tabatabai will address the mahfil. In-person capacity is 35 gents and 35 ladies. Of course, age restriction is above 10. For in-person attendance, registration can be made by filling the form at the announcements or through the link tinyurl.com/azsa-wr-sign-up. And for more information, in-person attendance requirements and procedures can be found in the Al Zahra reopening policies and procedures on the website. So please read the requirements before attending any in-person event. And of course, kindly please bring your own face mask, turba, and tasbih for any of these future in-person events. With that said, that wraps up our announcements. So just before we move on, we'd like to request 5 times Amma Yujib. So if you can please recite with me, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mudtarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su'. Amma yujibul mudtarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su'. Amma yujibul mudtarra idha da'ahu ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. Now, we'll also please note that this program will be live on Qaim TV. And now with that said, I just request you to please recite 1 time Surah Fatiha and 3 times Surah Ikhlas and convey the reward to all the marhameen, community members marhameen, your marhameen, Shahadan Millat Jafriya, Ulama Ikram, and Maraja Islam. So please Surah Fatiha for that as we move on to the next part of our program. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everybody. Am I live now?
Yes, alhamdulillah, we can hear and see you.
Wonderful. It gives me great pleasure, and it's indeed an honor for me to have been asked to serve as moderator tonight for this very important and topical session, which the organizers at Al Zahra have put together tonight, which is really on the mental health aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic. I would like to just let you know up front that the program is being streamed live on the Al Zahra YouTube channel, as well as live on Qaim TV. Most of you on here now probably know me. My name is Jafar Syed, and I'm a practicing physician here in the KW region. Happen to be a cardiologist here at St. Mary's Hospital, and do hold an academic appointment at McMaster, and have a bit of an interest in medical education, both for our medical students as well as in the postgrad level. And I've been here now for about 5 years plus. Tonight, it's a great honor for me to introduce our very esteemed speaker. Dr. Syed Akhtar Naqvi is a practicing psychiatrist in Washington, D.C. Dr. Naqvi has a very illustrious CV, if I may say so. Having graduated from residency at Yale University in psychiatry, and having completed a fellowship, additional fellowship in addiction psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. So without further ado, I would like to introduce and welcome with a loud salawat Dr. Syed Akhtar Naqvi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And I think the way it's going to work is we'll open up. Well, I'll hand over now to Dr. Naqvi for his presentation, and then after that we have a whole bunch of questions that have been submitted by attendees beforehand, which inshallah, time permitting, we'll try to get through as many of those as we can.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, and thank you, Dr. Jafar Syed. It's a great pleasure to be here amongst you. And thank you for the opportunity. I hope that all of you are, inshallah, are staying healthy in this unusual time of COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic has changed the entire world. It has changed how we take care of ourselves, how we interact with each other, how we used to travel, attend different events and celebrations, and go to places of worships. Due to such drastically changed circumstances, people are now in these days are living with fear, uncertainty, distress, anxiety, or depression. And many people have not, in fact, left their homes in months. A recent study from University of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which was published in the Journal of Depression and Anxiety, validates these concerns that patients diagnosed with COVID-19 are at a higher risk of experiencing anxiety, stress, PTSD, and sleep disorders. The university actually recruited 4,049 individuals in this study by using Instagram and Facebook. This study took place between April and June of 2020, and participants were asked to complete a 9 self-assessment questionnaire. The findings are very striking. 35 of these participants were found to have symptoms related to either depression or anxiety or PTSD or sleep problems. 80% of these participants with such symptoms happened to be women. Symptoms range from feeling sad to inability to concentrate, feeling hopeless, helpless, trouble falling asleep and maintaining sleep, experiencing nightmares, and so on and so forth. Another recent study published by my colleague, Dr. Adrian Preda at UCLA, California, demonstrated that patients with schizophrenia who also are later diagnosed with COVID-19, their risk of dying from COVID is 3 times higher compared to those patients who are not diagnosed with schizophrenia. And similar studies are going on in New York area. And in fact, some of the data published today, which validated the same results, that patients with schizophrenia are at higher risk of dying from COVID-related complications. These symptoms are challenging to all of us. It's affecting everyday people, including doctors and nurses and those who are at the forefront, what we call them as first responders. Many of them, especially the nurses and firefighters and those who are working with EMS, they are complaining of being burned out, tired, or exhausted. We also know that some other people who are at the forefront are grocery workers, transportation staff, delivery men, and people who are involved in mail service, delivering mail or delivering packages. As we all know that mental illnesses have never been given the same importance in society the way physical illnesses are given, due to the denial, stigma, or a lack of access to existing mental health services. Now, during this pandemic, these issues are posing even more challenges to already existing healthcare system that people can access to. When they call, many times the facilities are closed. Even they would like to set appointments, the appointments are not available. In-person assessments are not possible, and many of the in-person assessments are replaced by virtual Zoom meetings. And to schedule a Zoom meeting, even the wait time is 2 to 4 weeks, sometimes up to 2 months. So all these barriers have taken a great toll for all of us. Similarly, school-going children, now they are getting their education online. And as we know that children are very much, they enjoy learning in their school setting, more so with the little children. So those who are in higher schools or in colleges, they can get involved in online classes and reading material and do their assignments. Whereas those who are in early stages of their schooling, this becomes a special challenge for the students themselves, and in fact for the caregivers and for their parents as well. Many times one of the parent has to take off from their work to take care of their child because the daycare services are not available. And sometimes those who are at workplace, the online or long distance working is possible, and many times it's not possible. So all these issues are by itself a big topic to be discussed. Substance abuse, which is obviously my another specialty that I see a number of patients with this comorbidity. Surveys done recently in 2020 reflected that the risk of the statistics which were there in 1999, that people who are using drugs and alcohol, those who get addicted to marijuana and painkillers and subsequently to other opiates and heroin and cannabis, and some of them they use. Vaping used to be at some point a fashionable thing to do, unless people learned about that how dreadful this is and what kind of complications it's going to cause to the developing lungs and then developing brains. Now we have seen some downward movement of people using vapes, but cigarette smoking, marijuana, alcohol use, and other drug use disorder has drastically increased in 2020. In fact, when you compare the statistics from 1991 versus what is happening in 2020, there has been an 8-fold increase in drug use, and as a result, people dying from a drug overdose. Many of the people are not even going to hospital because of the fear of catching COVID. Now, a number of us, we have our loved ones. At times they get sick, or some of us might have some elderly people, those who are living in group homes or those who are living in elderly homes, nursing homes. And unfortunately, we have encountered a number of deaths in community, either because of COVID or other than COVID, but there are restrictions that these many people can go for janaza and these many people are supposed to attend, only family members, and funeral is going to be virtual and so on and so forth. So all these issues are causing a feeling of guilt amongst ourselves that we very much would like to be with our loved ones, especially in these kind of situations. For example, when a community member or a family member is sick, we certainly would like to go and visit them at home. And if they are in hospital, we go there. If we lose someone, we would like to go and console them. And we would like to say our rituals, Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un, not just because that, this is something that we are told to say, grown up in a Muslim family, but we got to think about the meanings which, as we all know, or many of us, the children might not know that this actually, even before this was the part of Quran, this kalmai istarjiya, this word of going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was first used by Imam Ali alayhi salam when Hazrat Amir Hamza, his uncle, was martyred in the battle of Uhud. Maula Ali said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un, which means that indeed we are from Allah and we are going to turn towards Allah. So this time of pandemic is reminding us that, when in good times we were able to spend some time with families and friends, we did in person. And now, since we cannot do, or we cannot spend as much time as we would like to with our loved ones, we still can spend some time by making phone calls, calling them on FaceTime, or doing video chat, going on Skype or going on Zoom. Since if we just do an audio call, that's not going to be as effective as while you are seeing the face and you are basically involved with your body language with your loved one. So I think these availabilities of these different options is also there that we should use and utilize more if we have not been using. Now we should not shy from accepting that death is a reality and there is no shame in having some mourning or grief. In fact, grief or mourning is a normal process. Our Holy Prophet has grieved when his son Hazrat Ibrahim passed away. He very much grieved. He grieved a lot when Hazrat Abu Talib alayhi salam, his caregiver, and Hazrat Khadija passed away. So much so that he declared this as the Amul Huzn, which means the year where he just wanted people to focus on the grief of Hazrat Abu Talib and Hazrat Khadija alayhi salam, because these two great personalities have sacrificed so much. Because of them, we are Muslim today, and because of their sacrifices, Holy Prophet was able to carry on his message. Muslims would be surprised to know that when Hazrat Ibrahim died, many of the companions were prompting him and saying, Ya Rasulullah, Anta Rasulullah wa Anta Tabka. You are the Prophet and you are crying. So the Prophet responded that it's natural to cry when you lose a loved one. If we are not crying, then obviously a heart which feels cries. There is something wrong, seriously wrong if we are not crying. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that for us, the life of our Holy Prophet is the role model. So, Holy Prophet has already set these examples for us that grief is very normal. And in fact, those who have a sensitive heart, not only they cry for themselves, but when the calamity befalls upon others, they go out and provide support to their family and friends and loved ones so that they can cope with these kind of situations. Now, here are a few things that we can do in this difficult time to keep ourselves healthy, not only physically healthy, but also emotionally stable. The topmost is going to be, we all should have a daily routine in our life. We must wake up and go to bed at a certain time. We should not waste our time. By having a routine in our lives is going to be the foundation of a healthy lifestyle, and it will maintain your healthy biological clock. We should avoid taking naps during the day if we certainly would like to enjoy a good night's sleep. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, that many of the symptoms associated, emotional symptoms associated with depression and anxiety and PTSD are feeling sad, feeling hopeless, helpless, not having a purpose in life, inability to concentrate, having sleep problems, either inability to fall or inability to maintain sleep. And once you wake up, you are not rejuvenated enough to carry on your daily work. So if we have a routine in our lives, then certainly these kind of things, having sleep problems, could be minimized, could be eliminated. Routine daily exercises are very helpful, especially if you have a habit of doing your exercise in the morning. Now, when I say exercise, it does not mean that, people should start lifting very heavy weights and should get involved in half an hour or an hour running on the treadmill. What I would like to say is that routine is very important, and if we are not exercising the way we should, then a beginner can start walking 15 minutes to 20 minutes and increase your duration from 15-20 minutes to half an hour. Then brisk walking, then running, Whether you enjoy running outside or running on the treadmill, your option. Then lifting some light weights, not just trying to make muscles from the very beginning, but if you keep having a healthy lifestyle, gradually it's going to happen. And then stay away from mind altering substances. Too much of caffeine is not good for you. Maybe a cup of tea or coffee in the morning is all that you need. So excessive caffeine intake can take away our sleep. Excessive soda intake can take away our sleep. And obviously, soda and other beverages, how much sugar they have in it, it has its own health problems, which can cause obesity, especially truncal obesity, then hypertension, hyperlipidemia, or in everyday language, increased cholesterol, more risk of heart disease and stroke. And I can see Dr. Saab that, this is his expertise. So he will be emphasizing on these issues as well. So, and there are several people who have lost their livelihood as a result of this pandemic. Many of them, they don't have their jobs. Some of them, they have their jobs, but their number of hours have been cut down. And many others who have the facility of working from home, but there are many people like me who have to physically go to the hospital and take care of patients. So, we should still take time and share our time and resources with those people who have lost their jobs, who have a sick one living with them. We must give at least a phone call to them and, just say that I was thinking about you. You came to my mind, and I was wondering how you have been doing, and is there anything I can do for you? And don't lose connection with your loved ones, because as you know that Silai Rahim, especially those who have lived in the same mother's womb, and you can extend this to the general good that all of our Aimma has displayed in their life. And obviously the lives of our Aimma is a role model for all of us. You know that during the night time, how Imam Ali alayhi salam, Hazrat Imam Ali Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, and other Aimmas, they have actually carried over naans and dates in their bags, and they distributed to the people, those who were in need. And so they wanted to provide to those who didn't have enough. Similarly, so these are some of the basic things that you can do. And since the topic is, COVID-related challenges, implications of mental illness issues, so I would like to also remind you that do not hesitate to call wherever you have to call. In fact, if somebody is feeling suicidal, must call the access helpline that I've been feeling suicidal and I am bored, and I was thinking about this and what should I do? Try to set an appointment with a counselor. Talk to the counselor. This used to be a very big tool that we are missing at this time, since children in a school, whenever they had any issue, or if the teacher has noticed that the child is not fully together and something is going on and maybe feeling sad or depressed or talking about suicidal ideations, then an urgent, immediate evaluation could be sought, and the child should be assessed and then should have gotten the proper help. Now, these, kids are not playing with other kids in a school. They are not being observed by teachers. So parents have some extra responsibility to be vigilant and always have some talk about, how they are doing, how their day has been. is there anything they are concerned about? If they know any friend or some neighbor who is in need that they would like to help, and how you can help them achieve that goal. If you have a loved one in nursing home, if you can visit, you can visit. If you cannot visit, then taking some meals there, calling them, doing a video chat. And people should always, especially the parents, they should always keep in mind that our kids have a big responsibility in this culture, especially now, since they are lacking a big piece in their life, which is their social aspects in school. So we must have some dialogue in substance abuse, that why we believe that substance should not be used even recreationally. I have seen a number of youth in my office brought by families where the young one starts using either vape or using marijuana. And they argue that, this is something which is legal. This is something which is available. And about half of the United States has legalized the recreational use of marijuana. So obviously, if the parents have those awareness, they should have some discussion, at least try to sell this notion of gateway drugs, that alcohol and marijuana and cigarettes, tobacco, these are gateway drugs that many kids, when they use, initially they feel like, they use it because of peer pressure, getting recognized, having fun. But in fact, this fun would not last, too long. And then this fun life culminates into substance dependence or drug use. And, it creates a lot of problem, leading to dropout from school, teenage pregnancy, truancy from school, lagging behind in your academic achievements and your goals. And then as a result, the person starts feeling sad, depressed. The person is unable to control their addiction, and they would like to take care of their withdrawal symptoms by using more and more drugs. And many of these times, these kids and youth, they end up dying from an accidental overdose. I know a number of cases where youth have actually, what they were trying to do was trying to seek pleasure, but they didn't know where the pleasure ends, and they meet their destiny, which is death, which is such a tragic thing in youth. Think about this, that a 17-year-old or 18-year-old, once they are unable to cope, and they just, because of drug use or because of just being bottled up, not sharing their thoughts with their loved ones, their friends, their family, their teachers, they try to deal on their own, and finally the problem becomes so much so that they are unable to take care of themselves, and the easy way out is to take an overdose and die from it. So I hope this was helpful. And obviously, when there is a need to seek some professional help, we must not hesitate, because mental illness is like physical illnesses. We should take like a person is not guilty for being diagnosed with hypertension or diabetes or high cholesterol. Similarly, a person should not be blamed to have depression, anxiety, PTSD, even drug and alcohol use. I see this as an illness. And since I see this as an illness, I don't see it as a moral problem. Therefore, I would like to approach this in a scientific way by respecting the person's privacy, doing a thorough assessment, giving you the tools, and then telling you that you must seek some therapy, go to self-help groups, consider yourself industrious and resilient. You should be resilient in this age, 17 and 18 years old. and you should having big goals and plans rather than losing hope and living a life in despair. And once you have seen a therapist, and if the therapist after assessment suggests you to take some medications, taking psychotropic medications, especially the medications for anxiety and depression, which are SSRI and SNRI, and time would not allow me to elaborate further, but these medications are very safe to take, and there are very minimal side effects. And obviously, the indications to use medications when that becomes the overwhelming evidence that the benefits are going to be more and the side effects are going to be minimal, a doctor or psychiatrist chooses to use the medication. We never jump on medications. So therefore, any of you who have some concerns that if I go to see a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist is going to start me on some medication, this would be the last thing that, we would come up. But even taking the medication prescribed by a doctor is a very safe bet. That said, I would like to thank you again for inviting me for this opportunity, and it has been a pleasure to share my thoughts with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naqvi, for that very enlightening presentation. I'd like to now kind of transition us into the Q&A part of the presentation. I'm just going to take a minute here to pull up some of the questions. We actually have received quite a lot of interest and questions from the community. So hopefully you're not going to get too tired by this, Dr. Naqvi, but we're going to throw a whole bunch of questions at you and, kind of try to seek some consensus on the approach to take with some of these very, very tough issues. So
Go ahead.
one of the questions that was received, I'll just kind of try to read it out. After the pandemic, I lost my job, and due to the current situation, I have not been able to find any other suitable employment. I've applied to many jobs, but don't get any response. I'm feeling quite frustrated due to the situation and my family responsibilities. Sometimes I actually get quite angry at members of my family without any reason. And this was particularly concerning to me when I read this. Sometimes I actually have considered the option of suicide. Please suggest to me how to overcome this mental stress.
Absolutely. As I said before, that this is a very much growing problem. Like if the depression, despair, and risk of suicide was 1 out of 10 pre-pandemic, now it is 4 out of 10 as a result of these challenges. So people in community, we all have responsibility to help those who don't have good enough. And I'm pretty sure that there is some government assistance available for unemployed, both in Canada as well as here in US. However, that employment assistance, unemployment may not be good enough to even pay rent. So community as a whole, I think it is our responsibility that, we should check on these brothers and sisters, those who are in need, and, channel our resources by sending them rations and all those things that they need. And the brother has expressed concerns that the symptoms have reached to the point where the brother has even considered taking his life away. So it's a very painful situation which touches my heart. I think once it goes to that point, then obviously I would recommend that you must consider seeing a psychiatrist. And if you don't have any available psychiatrists there, you contact with Hassan Raza, and then you can talk to me if needed, and those psychiatrists who are available in your community, you should approach them, and also try to set an appointment with the healthcare system and try to find a psychiatrist or a psychologist or even a therapist would be able to help you. And if you feel like that, the feelings are so much overwhelming that you cannot cope, then obviously you need to be hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. So please do so. I would recommend that.
Thank you, Dr. Naqvi. Just following up on that, I mean, I think that it's one of the things I've sort of observed is that, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, but I do feel that there is a stigma within our own community, a sort of a shame to even talk about these issues of mental illness within our Muslim communities, particularly the South Asian communities, and no one wants to admit that they're suffering from this kind of thing, that I think is a long-term battle as the communities evolve in North America. Perhaps if cultural norms start to shift, and we can start having more open conversations about these very real problems, rather than just sort of shove them under the rug or pretend that they're not there and keep a brave face. That's kind of one comment I had, and the other is that Islamically, we're enjoined, to look out for each other and, stay connected, keep the bonds within the community strong and inquire about each other. But it's also a kind of a double whammy that we haven't really been able to do that in the way that they were possible before because of the very distancing that we're forced to do and not able to gather and whatnot. That's hopefully as restrictions start to lift and physical gatherings are allowed again, then that can kind of go some way to reconnect people to others.
Absolutely. I agree with you what you just said. In fact, since these kind of issues is affecting all of us, and as you very well said, that even those who are in need, that we would like to make ourselves more available, we are unable to because of the barriers. Stigma has been there, is going to be there. So we have to have more education and dialogue going that, mental illnesses are like any other physical illness and should be taken as such. So, when I was in training, obviously, when I went for the residency training interview, I didn't share my own that, my father was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I was feeling, this is something I should hide from others. But in fact, when I was graduating from there, and then our chairman, Department of Psychiatry, said that psychiatry has came along, but it still has not reached the point where we should feel comfortable telling our own stories that I came to psychiatry, I did psychiatry, because some of my family member, was suffering from some psychiatric illness. So I think, partly our culture is responsible, but even in this modern society, that we are living, agreeing that one has a psychiatric illness is not an easy task. Many times people are in denial, especially those who are highly educated. They think that two things cannot exist. However, mental illness is an illness, and then if there is an illness, as I said before, it should be treated like, any other illness as we treat diabetes and high blood pressure. So I think there needs to be more education. Hopefully there is, some glimmer of hope after people are being vaccinated, that, as experts are saying, that by the end of this year, we should see some more normalcy in our routine. The life, hopefully in 2022, will go back to normal, and that would be the time when we need to have more workshops in schools, in our congregations, and we should encourage the people in our community to talk about anxiety, depression, how to stay away from drugs and alcohol, and how to cope, and how to achieve, goals, and how to accomplish your objectives. So this stigma, is because of fear. And the underlying fear is that what would happen, what the community would say. People are not going to, ask for, wedding in the family where mental illness exists. So the biggest fear is fear itself, and we have to work on that. So I would say that it's a big challenge that we all have to work together on.
Indeed, thank you for that. Follow-up question, I guess, is here, which is, I have 4 kids, and after COVID, or because of COVID, all of them are at home. I am not able to concentrate on my work, and as a result, my work performance is really suffering. My employer is also giving me a lot of stress to complete my deliverables on time, and I really don't have any other place to go to carry out my work aside from being home. This disturbs me a lot in the home. Are there any potential solutions to this?
Wow. I can have the feeling that, what the brother is going through. However, certainly putting myself in your shoes, is obviously you are going through a very difficult situation. I don't know what's the availability of your spouse, that, if she can give more time to your kids while you can focus on work. And if there had been something undiagnosed, attention deficit disorder, that you were able to manage so far by working in a structured environment, and now since there are more distractions around, you have not been able to focus. So all these thoughts go in mind, and what I would suggest is that not many places, not many people would have that luxury to dedicate a room to work just for, this is the work designated area. So I don't know the logistics, and obviously I'm not aware of that how much your spouse can contribute towards taking care of kids, and what the job expectations and demands are, and whether you have been diagnosed or not diagnosed with ADD. If not, then you should seek some professional help. And if you have the diagnosis of attention deficit disorder, then some medication can drastically improve the outcome. So all these thoughts would come to my mind. But certainly, it's a big challenge to manage 4 kids at home while you are also taking care of your work expectations.
Indeed. Another question that relates kind of to that, somebody asked, is that I'm living in the Greater Toronto area with my wife and 3 kids. My kids are quite young. My wife is taking care of them. When our local Islamic center was open, then I could at least bring one of them to the center to kind of get a change of environment. But during this lockdown, we obviously are not going out anywhere, and that avenue of going to the center is no longer available. And so we're all at home. But as a result, my wife sometimes is behaving quite abnormally with me, sometimes very sad, sometimes angry without any clear identified reason. And I really don't know how to treat, how I should respond to this. And we are really unfortunately not able to go out with our young kids. Is this a situation where, again, you would consider medications to try to manage this, or can there be some non-pharmacologic options to try to explore?
Well, a few thoughts come to mind. Although there had been time when families were taking their children to the congregation, to Imam Bargah or mosque, and now because of shutdown, that option is not available. But I would like to remind you again that, so many programs are still happening virtually. So please log on to those programs which you and your kids can sit together and learn from it and spend some time. And, obviously, when we hear about the good morals and stories related to our holy immaculate personalities. Through their blessings, we also get some inspiration, and then, so that part of the issue, that going to mosque or Imam Bargah, that you were taking your kids at least once a week, is not possible. Virtually, you can actually do it every day if you would like. There are so many centers and so many programs which are available virtually. Now, feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, keyed up, on edge, irritable, angry, these all are symptoms of being under stress. And, I cannot say that we should not stress, because stress comes, unintentionally, and it is, because of several factors which are playing a part with our brain. However, there are certain, things that if we can incorporate in our lives, then, we can better manage stress. As I said, in my presentation, that having a structure in life, getting up and going to sleep every day at the same time, then, utilize some relaxation techniques by, meditation, deep breathing exercises, doing yoga, and those kind of exercises where you are meditating and you are trying to find your own inner self and your strength, and asking help, obviously, from the creator, that, since we all are going through this suffering, inshallah, this time is going to be over soon. So meanwhile, these are the things that, you can do before considering medication. However, if these things you have tried and you have failed, even deep breathing exercises and meditation, then the role of medication starts. And there are some very safe medications like fluoxetine, paroxetine, citalopram, escitalopram, and Effexor, and so on and so forth. List is very long. Then you can start one medication in a low dose, prescribed by a doctor. And if needed, then the dose may be, titrated up to the effective dose, and then you are going to see the benefit. So if that is the need, please, consult a psychiatrist.
Very good. Another kind of related question, I guess, on the home front as well is, my kids are attending school classes from home, but they're quite frustrated and they miss their in-person class. I feel, and I notice this definite change in the kids' behavior and attitudes, where they in fact want to be left alone most of the time in their own rooms. And they also get angry on, small issues. I myself also try to stay calm, but I'm also guilty of losing my cool, and my anger sometimes boils up without any control. And I sort of feel at those moments that I just want to get out of the house and go somewhere else. Kindly advise how I might be able to control my feelings, and what sort of approach should I take with my kids who are sort of bottling themselves up and kind of withdrawing socially.
Well, we all enjoy social activities, and we are certainly missing, those social activities that we used to get involved before this pandemic. Our children, specifically, because, in school, not only they learn, but they also interact with their, peers, and then they get involved in sports and basketball and so on and so forth, and running and, competition with each other. So all those healthy activities are missing. Now, the brother mentioned that at times he feels overwhelmed, and then, he feels like walking out of home. Well, if the weather is nice and you are walking out of home, take your kids with you, because, I think that is going to be a very good, exercise for everybody to spend some time in nature, having fresh air. And while we are enjoying the fresh air, then we should also get involved in deep breathing and, initially just walking out of home, even if you are feeling frustrated, and then, you start walking fast, and then you start running, and then you stay positive, then I can guarantee that you are going to forget, at least for a moment, what was the leading cause of you that you left the house. But, lashing out at children or family members is certainly is something which, is not a very healthy exercise. And, anger is something that we all need to control our anger. How? That remains a task, and we all need to learn that task because, once, and as our imams have said, that, the injury inflicted by the tongue, does not heal, and the, injury inflicted, by sword could heal easier. So therefore, what we say to our loved ones, what kind of behavior we display towards our loved ones, and if they are children, obviously they are dependent upon us, and we certainly, should not display our anger towards them. Rather, we should be, you know, paying more attention, display our mercy and kindness and passion, and allow them to express their thoughts. Another, cultural issue is that we try to impose our thoughts on them, and we don't try to listen to their concerns. Even if our kids are saying something, and if we for a moment keep quiet and just listen, I think, the child gets this feeling that, I got an endorsement. There is somebody who can listen to my concerns, and I think it will go a long way. So these are some of the tools that we should be able to manage our anger.
Wonderful. I mean, from my perspective, I would say that children are very, very sensitive to their surroundings. They pick up on lots of things that as adults we may not really realize they do. They pick up on our body language, what we're saying, how adults are talking to each other. And children also, when they react to stress, they sort of can act in very ways that are very different than you might expect. Like some may internalize their tension and bottle up, and some may act out their frustration in more outwardly physically aggressive means or manner. So I guess it does take a heightened sensitivity on our part as adults to recognize, what our behaviors are doing, or what kind of effect they're having on our immediate surroundings, for sure.
Absolutely.
One follow-up, simple question, I guess, that there's some tough ones we threw at you, but how about a simple question? Somebody wanted to know, what's the difference between just feeling down and being clinically depressed? How can you tell the difference between the two?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, as I said, the people are feeling anxious and they are stressed out. And we heard a few examples of being angry or irritable or not being able to, pay attention and concentration, not being a good parent. But whether this is generalized anxiety disorder or whether this is a major depressive disorder, the key element here is impairment in psychosocial functioning, which means that if somebody has been depressed, and obviously the clinicians know the criteria that we got to have, at least specific to your question that you ask about whether feeling sad or being clinically diagnosed with major depressive disorder, both are the same things or different. So here is the difference, that, the key factor is impairment in psychosocial functioning. As I said somewhere in our talk that, whenever we lose someone, it's natural to feel sad, after losing a loved one or having a bump on the road, or what you were aiming and what your objective was, and you were unable to meet that threshold, and then, fallen short of. So disappointment, resentment, these kind of issues will certainly cause a feeling of sadness or being down. But then if person is sad or depressed or feeling down every day, more days than not for at least 2 weeks, And for that 2 weeks time frame, the person also had loss of sleep, loss of appetite, feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, inability to concentrate, even having suicidal ideations, or certain times in crisis, people may even hear some voices or feel paranoid. That is the severe kind of depression. Then certainly it's time to see a psychiatrist, and now it meets the criteria for a major depressive disorder. But I would suggest, out of caution, that my audience should not start diagnosing themselves, that if they meet 2 weeks diagnostic criteria, then they are clinically diagnosed and therefore medication is needed. That is not true, because the research has shown that even mild to moderate kind of depression could be treated as successfully as it is treated with medications. Cognitive behavioral therapy will also equally effective, will treat this condition. However, medications are reserved for those who are severely depressed. And once again, a mental health professional, a psychologist or psychiatrist should be able to give this diagnosis. So again, with caution, please try not to self-diagnose yourself, but just to delineate impairment in psychosocial functioning is the key element. And then this, feelings of depression and, profound lack of interest in anything should be, every day, every single day for at least 2 weeks or more in a row.
Those would be the key big warning signs for sure. I guess related to that, the question was, how can we scientifically prove or diagnose that there is a mental disorder, just like the way we can diagnose a heart attack by doing an ECG? So I think you already touched on it a little bit, where you alluded to the fact that there are established diagnostic criteria, the DSM, I guess. I'm not sure what version of it are we on now. Is it the DSM? 5, okay. So when I was training, it was the DSM-4. But so yes, the diagnostic manual that kind of has criteria to lay out clear-cut criteria that have to be met, that you would use to diagnose. I'm not sure if we're still using the term Axis 1 disorders.
Well, accesses are gone. They were in DSM-4, and now, we got rid of, or in fact, the panel who put together the new manual, they got rid of excesses, but all the mental illnesses are now, diagnosed as such, and there is no excess 1, 2, 3, 4. But, when there were excesses, the way it had been diagnosed previously until DSM-4, all the clinical conditions, psychiatric conditions, acute or chronic, they were on Axis 1, and Axis 2 was, specific for personality disorders and mental retardation. Now they call it cognitive disorders. And then Axis 3, other medical conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, HIV, obesity, hyperlipidemia, and sleep apnea, and so on and so forth. And Axis 5, Axis 4 was all these stressors. So losing job, living in this pandemic, fear of getting sick, so on and so forth, and lack of finances, access to healthcare. And Axis 5 was a number. So 100 was considered the normal functioning number, and then 60 would be considered for those folks who seek outpatient mental health treatment, and then those who are occupying the inpatient beds. 30, 40 would have been the case. Those who are feeling suicidal, maybe 20 is the number. But now the association has gotten rid of this Axis system, and everything is now on Axis 1.
Okay. So here's a question. I'm going to kind of read it out literally and see if I can transliterate it a little bit. At which stage of a mental problem or disorder can a person be really declared as being, and they use the word diwana, meaning, I guess, in which stage can a person really be felt to meet these criteria for being, I guess, insane or clinically mentally ill? And therefore, there are Shari laws that pertain to someone who is mentally incapacitated or insane or not capable at that moment. So because there are Shari laws that pertain to how you would deal with somebody who is in that state, yet there may be people who perhaps could have a clinical diagnosis of a mental disorder, yet still be functioning and doing kind of, having some sort of functional existence, maybe even, holding down a part-time job or, attending school or studies part-time, still doing all of that while still having a diagnosis. How do you decide when a person kind of transitions from being, I guess, functional and therefore to be treated as someone who is mentally sane versus when they've crossed that threshold and now they have to be treated differently?
Yeah. So every mental illness would affect our brain's ability to process the information and then make appropriate choices and work with reasoning and so on and so forth. So these are the frontal lobe brain function. And in that regard, this frontal lobe in our brain distinguishes human being from primates, that, the human beings, they have a big, well-developed frontal lobe in the brain. Now, these mental illnesses does affect in the Dr. you mentioned about DSM-4. In DSM-3, they used to classify psychiatric disorders as neurosis versus psychosis, and now that terminology is also, is not being used anymore. Whereas the neurosis would reflect those kind of mental illnesses where with treatment you can restore complete functioning, like anxiety disorders, major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder in maintenance, not when they are in crisis. Whereas the psychotic spectrum disorders, which are now schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, these are some of the more difficult to treat psychiatric conditions, where if the disease is severe, then the person will not have the ability to process the information, come up with reasoning, abstract reasoning, make their own self-care plans, and may not know what is right and what is wrong. So once they lose that capacity to make rational decisions, to take care of themselves, then we can say that this person is incapacitated because of the underlying mental illness. And in many cases, severe chronic schizophrenia, and even schizophrenia, once they are diagnosed in the beginning, their functioning is not as bad, and with treatment you can slow down the progress of illness. However, the long-term schizophrenia, where the illness had been there for 20, 30 years and the patient had not responded to medications, those, kind of conditions in layman literature, is still known as, divana, or in Arabic language, majnun. But, that divana or majnun is not a psychiatric diagnosis. It's the presence of a, mental status which the person presents because of, a very long, dreadful mental illness, in many cases with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. And in some cases, then, patients who are diagnosed with dementia, because in dementia, this is also a disease where after 10 years of being diagnosed with dementia, the person is going to gradually lose their bodily functions, and they would not even recognize their own loved ones. They cannot take care of themselves, and so on and so forth. So obviously for these people, those people, you can say that does not have the capacity that the other normal sane person would have. But certainly, what are the Sharia implications, whether, that person is supposed to say Salat or not to say Salat, is not, my area to give an opinion. So I will certainly, recommend that if one is going through, or you have a loved one who is going through, these kind of issues, then certainly ulama are there to ask about the Sharia obligation, and so on and so forth. But in scientific language, there is no such thing as being crazy. There is no such thing as being majnu, or there is no such thing as being pagal. So these are the terminologies that we use in everyday language, whether we are using Urdu language or English language or Arabic language, but there is no such thing as majnu or being crazy or being pagal.
Very good. A quick question somebody asked was, what is nihilism and what are its manifestations or symptoms?
Well, nihilism is a kind of situation where the person feels so much hopeless and helpless that they might experience that their body parts have started decaying and their limbs are being detached from their body, and the hands are being decayed and lost function, and they cannot stand on their feet, and so on and so forth. So being extremely pessimistic and having that overwhelming feeling of being inadequate is known as, it goes to the extreme, and then it is known as nihilistic delusion. So although it is not real, which delusion means that something which the person believes is real, whereas in fact it's not real. So although the person who's suffering may feel that the person is going through nihilistic symptoms, but physically there is nothing wrong. Emotionally, certainly the person is extremely sick, and maybe some profound depressive symptoms the person is going through, and should be diagnosed with depression and should receive treatment accordingly.
Very good. There's another question, I guess, here. Let me bring this up here if I can. Can things like having an inferiority complex or being suspicious of others or having extraordinary amounts of guilty feelings and self-punishing behavior, can these kinds of things be successfully dealt with through psychotherapy?
Absolutely. We have to remind ourselves that, we believe in 14 immaculate, and the mankind, I should say, we all have our own, defects and deficiencies, and none of us are perfect, Even so, in this age and time, social media is also portraying and influencing, giving a bad influence, I should say, that sometimes, and our youth are very vulnerable, when they follow that some family is doing so well, it looks like that the life is just, they are living in heaven, house on paradise, and they are having all the resources that a mankind should have. And there used to be a time, I'm glad that, the sentiment is dying down, that people were taking, when they would go to restaurant or they would go for vacations, they would take the picture of what they are eating and what they have ordered and so on and so forth, and what kind of clothes they are wearing, and the competition and so on and so forth. We all are born with the same skills, and unless somebody had required special education, I'm pretty sure that there may have been, and there are certainly many, many more experts, who went through different circumstances, may not be as qualified as I am or some of my other colleagues, but it does not mean that, I'm more special and I, am more talented than them. Certainly, this is, if you are having a big target, then you are going to make plan for that, you are going to strive for that, you will dedicate yourself, you will dedicate your time, and then, hopefully you are going to achieve your target. However, if you are unable to, then, Lord has some other better options for you. So I don't think so that failure should be considered as that we are inadequate. I have failed some of my professional exams. It was not like that throughout from medical career. I have been a dashing person, and then I have been prevailing. No matter which exam I take, I would pass. No, I had failures in my life. So, but that failure should not, hold you back. And you look into those failures and you look into your deficiencies, you try to work on, and then certainly the next time you're going to have a better outcome. That said, envy is bad. We should not be envious. We should not be jealous of others. Lord has given whatever the destiny, however they wanted to give us. Some are given more wealth, some are given more strength, and then, if we are going to have more resources, then we are going to be hold more accountable that how we spend our resources. So there is give and take, and there is a justice in the eyes of creator. So we should not be in competition, but competition is good in terms of, education and learning and, good skills and abilities, rather than on those materialistic things that, one has. I don't want to, keep giving examples, like, but some people are very crazy about, they need to have latest car, for example. Well, if you don't have the resources, or even if you have the resources and the old car is running fine, then there is no need to get involved in driving, those fancy cars that is going to be a nightmare for you to manage. So why you create self-created problems which are not there? So I would, try to live in your limits and be ambitious, work hard, and hope from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that inshallah, if you are seriously giving your 100%, then inshallah, Nusrat is going to be, the help is going to be from Lord the Creator.
Wonderful. I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but there are at least a couple more questions I could put forward. One was just sort of a general question to you on what do you think the impact is? Well, let me ask that question after, but the first was just more for the general audience to kind of at least get a sense of the overall prevalence of mental illness in society. What are the current understandings of what the prevalence is for some of the more major mental illnesses in the general population? And specifically things like depressive illness and bipolar illness. What, how frequent is that even in the general population pre-pandemic? And now in the pandemic era, are we sort of seeing this more as this kind of maybe not increasing in incidence, but maybe perhaps we're just diagnosing it more because it's being unmasked by the conditions?
I think I touched upon these statistics, in my presentation, that if one or two people were diagnosed with depressive disorder out of 10 pre-pandemic, now at least 4 out of 10 they do have. And another statistics recently came up that, within 90 days of being diagnosed with COVID, about 25% of population those who are diagnosed with COVID are going to experience, where, they would be considered having either generalized anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder or panic disorder. So, the incidence has at least four-fold increase compared to pre-pandemic. The drug abuse has increased at least fourfold. If the statistics tell us that high school going kids, our youth, if the incidence of and feeling depressed. So it's a real thing, obviously, since lack of social interaction and financial insecurity and, not having the social outlet where, we all used to go. I know some of the elderly patients who were going to religious centers, and going to the center on Thursday and Friday, Saturday was their routine, and getting involved with family, the community members, and chatting with them, checking with them, sharing meal with them and coming back home. It was a big social circle for them. And some of them, after losing that, they lost the ability to navigate. One of them I met, at least two of them, they have now dementia. So, it is not something that people are just making this up, but there is at least fourfold increase overall in the, incidence of mental illnesses in this pandemic period.
Right. And certainly that's very true of the general population, where, there's been a massive, it's quite prevalent to begin with, and then B, in the setting of the pandemic or stressful situations, it just tends to, overflow. What's your sense of the incidence within the Muslim communities? And it's a bit of a touchy subject, and there's probably not really much great data on it. But it tends to be something that we don't have our radar out for. And the jamaats and the mosques and the imam bargahs are not really set up to identify such situations or problems, are they? And similarly, there really aren't a lot of Muslim faith-based counseling resources available. There may be some in the GTA, but for most, probably not, right?
Well, we are talking about science and illnesses. So, these are unfortunately equal opportunity things which involve Muslims, Jewish, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, non-believers equally. So I didn't touch upon, post-traumatic stress disorder and, abusive families where domestic abuse has been a problem. Many times in these dysfunctional families, the children, when they would go to school, that would have been a respite for them, that, they at least would have some quality time spent with their caring and loving teacher and with other peers. And now all the time, they have to live with a harsh disciplinarian father or mom who would smack at them, who would yell at them, who would not listen to them, shove them, push them. So these things are equally prevalent, in Muslim as well as in non-Muslim society. In fact, I'm not going to name, but I was in company for Hajj with an honorable alim, and out of the fun, no fun, he shared with me that, Dr. Saab, these days I'm reciting more divorces than nikah. So, it's a reality in this community that divorces are happening at an alarming rate. However, we all know that, our imams, Imam Sadiq al-Islam in particular, has mentioned that, out of all those permissible things which are allowed for you, the least desirable thing to go for is going for divorce. I mean, it is not haram, obviously. Therefore, it is permissible. But all these things are happening even in Muslim society. I wish that, we have more people take interest and sign up to seek knowledge in terms of mental health care. Some of the youth should spend some time shadowing with psychiatrists and psychologists, and learn about psychology and various defense mechanisms, and how uh, a good society functions, so that once we are mindful of triggers and bad behavior, we can avoid those happening, and we can do some preemptive measures. That said, we don't have, as you ask me, that is there any special kind of Muslim counseling or counseling available through mosque or Imam Bargah. Unfortunately, when things go out of hand, and whether this is a child who has started using drugs or there's an abusive partner, first thing they go to Maulana. And I don't, I'm not complaining that they should not go to Maulana. It's always good to ask advice, whom you feel is wise. And but don't burden your alim with all these issues, because alim is obviously their expertise is deen. And rather than asking me that whom I would label as Divana or Majnu, I think this is the question you should be asking, Maulana. Whereas if there is some domestic violence and abuse, and if there is, then, you should involve law enforcement rather than calling me or Maulana. And if someone is using drugs or alcohol, and there are some family issues that you would like to talk about, even our Christian brothers and, those who share other faith, I mean, family relations are everywhere in every faith and congregation. So people are equally skilled. You don't have to find a Muslim doctor to treat a major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder. In fact, one of the attorney actually tried to get me on, when I was representing a case and the patient was dangerous, and I wanted to keep him in the hospital. The attorney, said, Dr. Naqvi, your patient is Pentecostal. Certainly, that's not your faith. So how would you, consider having lack of expertise, in that area? So I said, Miss So-and-so, every doctor is trained in university or in a residency training program, how to diagnose mental illness, how to treat mental illness. And the American Psychiatric Association has specific guidelines which does not specify that this is the treatment of a Muslim person with major depressive disorder, and this is the treatment for a Jewish person with mental disorder, and this is the treatment for somebody who is abusing their wife as per Buddhist faith. So I think these are all signs and should be dealt accordingly. So, if spirituality is important, if you get some support by talking to your religious scholar, please do so. I'm not preventing that. But don't overwhelm the, alim who is not skilled to take care of these issues. Now, many times, even ulama have shared with me that many times these spouses come to me when they have already decided that, they are going to divorce, and there is no possibility or consideration for reconciliation. Well, if that's the case, then go ahead and divorce. Because if you are going to an alim, or if you are going to a psychiatrist or a therapist, go there with open-mindedness, so that you are not wasting your time and you are not wasting the therapist or doctor's time. And then at the end of your 12 or 14 sessions, there should be a better outcome, that we learn from each other, and we try to work with each other, and we try to learn our vulnerabilities, because none of us is perfect, and all of us, we have our flaws, And only those 14 Masumin who are immaculate, they are imperfect. They are perfect, and we all have imperfections.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I misspoken.
On that note, I guess I was meaning to ask, or at least make the point that, at least from a medical standpoint, there's been many studies published that show that people who have a strong faith-based system that they adhere to, they deal with medical illness better, they heal better, they recover faster from critical illness than those people who don't have any religion or faith-based structure that they draw upon. And it seems to be irrespective of what faith you have, whether you're Christian or devout,
Exactly.
or Muslim or Jewish or whichever, but just having a profound faith seems to give you a more profound sense of resilience to cope with severe stressors. And I wonder whether that for us in the Muslim community is one of our biggest resources, particularly the Shia community, that can draw upon so many stories of immense suffering of our Aim Masumin. And, we've been brought up, as children, listening to the stories of their suffering and adversity, and how they carried the day, took the high road, and, were the paragons of sabr and taking absolute stresses to the most incredible level and still persevering. And so I wonder whether for us as a community, for Shias in particular, whether that's been a very powerful asset in our corner that many in the community have been privately drawing on as they live their lives in this lockdown or isolated state. I do suspect that, I think that that's been a very powerful force, at least on the positive side, helping us. And I think that when we as a community had regular physical programs running until we were mandated to stop them, I think that having the physical programs was certainly a very big boon to the community.
Absolutely, there is no question, and there is great deal of literature in every faith that people, those who believe in higher power, they do well, as the teachings of Quran also tell us that wasta'inu bis-sabri was-salat, that we should get help by offering salat and fasting. And when I touched upon that, when Holy Prophet lost his son Ibrahim, he was literally crying, and some of the ashab actually prompted to him that you are the Holy Prophet and you are crying. So Holy Prophet's response was that when you feel that when you lost a loved one, it's very natural to cry. So yes, therefore I am crying. But if I start complaining and whining that, why Lord, this is me, why not somebody else? Why all the tragedies and calamities are for me? And oh Lord, this is not just, God forbid, then that is not permissible. So therefore, yes, absolutely, I agree with you that, these religious congregations we all deeply miss, and it's a great resource. It has been a great resource for all of us, and inshallah, once this pandemic is over, which we hope, that what scientists are telling us, that if everybody gets vaccinated and many of us will get herd immunity, then inshallah better days are coming, and then 2021 hopefully is not going to be as bleak as 2020 or 2021. So religiosity is very important in every faith, every congregation. So is the case, as Dr. Jafar Syed touched upon, that the tragedy of Karbala, and that is the climax. So whenever we lose any loved one, we forget the pain and grief of losing our loved one, But once we start thinking about the, tragic circumstances and the great sacrifice of Imam Hussain alayhi salam and his companions, it gives our hearts sukoon, peace, comfort, and then, by remembering those immaculate personalities, we tend to forget our pain by remembering their pain. You absolutely touched upon the right subject, Dad.
Without doubt. A question that was posted just now pertaining to hypochondriasis. So I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly, but perhaps this person actually had COVID in September of 2020, and ever since they recovered from COVID, they've now been very much kind of almost, they're calling themselves a hypochondriac, meaning that they're hyper vigilant about any possible repeat illness or infection, I guess. And how do you that a lot, or or do people tend to go the other way, where if they've survived COVID and they come out from that, then now they're sort of, well, I beat it, and I'm now stronger for it, and you tend to be a little bit more philosophical about it after you've survived it.
COVID is such a strange illness that in some people, the symptoms are just limited to loss of taste and smell. And, some people just have runny nose and mild cough and headache and body ache, and then as if they had mild flu, and then within a week or so, they start feeling better. So after being exposed, most likely on the 4th day, their test is going to show positive. And this is going to be positive for another 2 weeks, but after 10 days initially the CDC recommended 14 days quarantine. Now this is reduced to 10 days. So after 2 weeks, many people will recover and should be asymptomatic. However, that said, I have a colleague in the hospital who actually was diagnosed with, he happened to be a psychiatrist as well, and he was diagnosed with COVID in March. And he was unable to come back to work until, January 14th. So, those people who have some underlying conditions like diabetes, hypertension, and obesity, sleep apnea, or some other comorbidities, and their symptomatology had been very extensive illness, which had involved lungs, so much so that they ended up having hypoxia and, ended up going to hospital, and at some point required, positive pressure ventilation, being on ventilator. Those people, some of them could not even make it, passed away because of that. But if somebody has recovered, then gradual functioning comes back to normal. Now, the person who is referring to hypochondriasis, I really don't know what the residual symptoms after having the COVID are, because if the person had been seriously ill and lungs had been involved, then we know that about 1/3 of patients who are diagnosed with COVID are going to have some coagulopathy. They will also end up having pulmonary fibrosis, and then as a result, they will have compromised lung function, lung capacity. So they will have some residual, breathing problems, and, reduced threshold for exercise. So they cannot walk long distances, otherwise they are going to get breathless. So if those are the symptoms, then, you need to certainly check your internal medicine doctor or pulmonologist. Now, hypochondriasis is more so a self-diagnosis than I have seen, in my 25 years of doing psychiatry. Unless somebody believes that a person had, for example, a person believes that I have some cancer or ulcer, And then, the person goes to the primary care, the primary care doctor gives some medication and says that take this medication and come back in a month and then we'll see. And the person goes back and, the person has taken some Pepsid or, some other cimetidine or some other medication and then has not felt relieved. Then the then the internal medicine will send the person to GI doctor. Then the GI doctor will say, okay, I will go inside and do some gastroscopy, endoscopy, and then we'll take some samples and then we'll take some pictures and figure out what is in there. And they go in there, they take samples, and then they say, well, I didn't see any ulcer, I didn't see any tumor, no structure, there's no narrowing, there is no hyperacidity, it looks normal to me. I have taken some biopsy, and then let's send for biopsy and see if there is any H. pylori or not. And then, the culture shows there is nothing. And the person says, doctor, but it still hurts. Now you should consider yourself as hypochondriac, because you are, strongly believing that there is some illness in your stomach. So maybe the case with your heart. And, despite EKG and exercise tolerance test and, echo and cardiology consult, the doctor has said, well, I think, I don't see any pathology. Then believe your doctor rather than convincing yourself that, no, you really have some heart disorder or some disease related to your stomach. In that case, you can say that you are hypochondriac. But, we don't use this terminology.
Right. Related to that, perhaps I would just kind of maybe flip the question a bit and sort of say, well, what about hypochondriasis or generalized anxiety about getting COVID? And I guess it's more of an observation in my own practice, being fairly busy in the hospital, going there almost every day, and the kind of front lines. You see a lot of different responses to the COVID pandemic situation, particularly back in the first wave in March, April, when we didn't really know much about the virus.
Absolutely. So the study which I mentioned that the University of Pittsburgh, they did from April to June 2020, where they had recruited 4,049, subjects, those who felt that they have some anxiety or depressive symptoms since this COVID has been out there. So out of those, when these people, they felt that they may be diagnosed with COVID and they went and tested themselves, only 15% of those, in fact, had been diagnosed with COVID, whereas 85% of those who felt themselves that they had COVID did not have COVID. So, these are the dynamics, but certainly the stress is making the people feel overwhelmed. There is more responsibility, there is lack of a structure, there are financial barriers. Even if you are going to work, then having adequate PPEs and then burnout and so on and so forth. All those things are causing stress, but it cannot be considered as being hypochondriac. If somebody is feeling anxious every single day, more days than not for at least 6 months, and they have some ancillary symptoms, at least they have 3 of those, like they feel like their mind is going blank, they cannot think proper words, they cannot concentrate, they have headache or non-specific pains, aches, and they are feeling anxious in everyday situation, not just at workplace, not at home, but they are concerned of where their retirement is going, and they are concerned whether they are going to have another job or not, or whether kids are going to be successful in school or not, or if they are concerned that somebody is going to break into my house and for example, the mob is going to divert their attention from Capitol Hill to minorities, God forbid. Then all these concerns in various areas this meets the criteria for generalized anxiety disorder, and it should be treated with some, medications like SSRI or SNRI. If deep breathing exercises, talking to a therapist, meditation, relaxation techniques, and some, change in your routine in lifestyle would not help, then medication certainly would play some role.
Wonderful. Further to that, I mean, I was just observing that within, people I've met, colleagues, etc., and just friends and community members as well, is that there's really a big spectrum of responses to this pandemic threat or conditions where, on one extreme, as you said, you've got the Capitol Hill type mob folks who, are one extreme where they, think that COVID is a myth or it's overblown and it's just being hyped up because it's a deep state world elite pandemic, versus then you've got the other extreme where people having extreme fear of having any contact with anybody and wearing double or triple masks and visors and sanitizing their hands 20 times a day, and shunning all physical contact with anybody outside, perhaps their own immediate family. So you see those two extremes, and you see a spectrum from one end of the pendulum to the other. And I do believe that there has been, it's been challenging at times for folks to maintain a balance of how you respond to this and keep it all in perspective. And perhaps as maybe, before I get too far into this, I mean, just want to know how you're doing for time, Dr. Naqvi. I mean, have we exhausted your energies already?
Not really. I think the question answer is more better than the narrative presentation. So keep going. When you would like to stop, I will stop.
The questions are coming fast and furious. There seems to be certainly a lot of pent up demand and interest about these kinds of things. That does speak to the fact that I think these are very practical, real world issues that, we need to talk about more. But going back to the issue of how people respond to these situations, and there being clearly a variability from one end to the other, how best can people maintain that balance of finding that middle ground when you're bombarded constantly with, every time you turn the news on here in Canada, at least, I think 90% of the stories or airtime is just constantly COVID, COVID, COVID. The numbers are up, and the third wave is coming. It's been very interesting that, for me personally, I've actively tried to avoid watching the news. And this is coming from a full-time frontline physician who I just get sick and tired of seeing it. And I feel that sometimes the media distorts the lens for everybody. And if I'm not even a medical professional and I'm hearing this stuff all day about what the numbers are doing and where the next wave is coming, I think it can promote anxiety in people, and it creates
exactly. So I think, I don't have any specific recommendations except for Dr. Fauci and others at Center of Disease Control, CDC, have already, set forth for us that we should use 6 feet physical distance. Everybody should be using mask. If you are not with your immediate family, avoid big gatherings, and wash your hands whenever you have some contact with something, and then certainly before you eat and after you eat, and so on, after you have used the restroom. So all those things. I mean, we know that at least in US now the cases are reducing. So the maximum number of patients we had was like, about 2 months ago, 3 months ago. And there was a very alarming, statistics in March and April when there were frozen trucks standing outside the hospitals in New York. So luckily, we have passed through that phase, and even in places like California and other places, we have less number of newly diagnosed COVID cases, and as the physicians are learning about COVID, we all are learning about this new disease. We have some treatment options, at least, if not the cure for the disease. So, like the false information that even very prominent people were promoting, the use of chloroquine has no place, we know. But there is great deal of myth about, vaccines would do that and people should not get vaccinated because, Bill Gates is going to monitor you and, uh, some people are going to be sterile and you will not be able to procreate and so on and so forth. These are absurd propaganda. So don't listen to that because, if the science says that, Pfizer Bion vaccine is 95% effective, and if Moderna is 94.1% effective, and if at least these two vaccines are available in both US and Canada, and you have the access to vaccine, go for it. You must get vaccinated. In fact, from Idare Jafariya, we had a seminar when, our religious scholar Sheikh Jalil was invited to, tell us about what our Marajes say, in terms of getting vaccinated versus showing their position. He said that saving your own life is wajib. So therefore, if you have something which can save your life, go for it. So that's the religious, ruling on that. And then even influenza vaccine is not more than 60% effective. So these vaccines are 95% effective. So why you should stay away? And if you are concerned about people are going to monitor you, then stop using cell phones. Stop meeting with each other because the government knows, FBI knows where have you been, with whom you met, how many contacts you had today, your browser history, all the information that you do online shopping and so on and so forth. You need to be extremely careful. And so rather than wasting our time on this media which is propagating one party's propaganda versus the other party's propaganda, we have to limit our social time. Certainly, this is the key factor, not to feel overwhelmed. That if you are going to, be on Facebook or on cell phone, then be there only for half an hour or an hour. If you are going to listen to some podcast or some television show, then maximum TV watch should be half an hour to an hour. Then get yourself involved in some other routines, have a daily routine in your life and then daily exercise and having contact with your loved ones and even sending an email to somebody that you used to say salam alaikum in the congregation and now you don't see, calling a person and, just typing a message that I was thinking about you. I learned that you were sick. You are in my prayers. It creates a good impact. It gives a good impression to the person. You are sending the message that you care for them. It makes you feel good if you can spend some of your time and some of your resources with those who are in need. And you will find there are many in community these days because of COVID. So you spend your time rather in healthy activities. Don't forget to spend some time in leisure. Physical activities, however, are limited because of the cold season indoor. But whenever you have the opportunity to go out, please go out and get involved in some sports. If you are not a big sports person, just walk, jog, run. And, just spending some time in fresh air is certainly going to help. And don't listen to these, I would say stay away from all those social media like, the green button that many of us are wasting our time listening, whatever is coming to you. There are many people who are sending whatever they feel and there is no filter. So please minimize that influx in order to not feel overwhelmed.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you. I think that's a wonderful practical points as well. I was going to sort of say semi-facetiously, and I kind of alluded to it already, which is sometimes just turn off the TV and stop watching the news if it's bombarding you constantly with negativity surrounding the pandemic and just stoking fear in your mind and heart. And the second thing is, again, limit your social media time and turn off things that are just bombarding you with, as you said, unfiltered content coming from left, right, and center. And again, we alluded to it earlier, but the importance of regular physical activity. And we know it's difficult when it's -20 outside. It's the dead of winter, but I still see people out there, running in the middle of -5 or 10, or they're out hiking at least, getting fresh air. Just leaving the confines of your house is very, very important. So certainly regular exercise, leaving the house. And then we touched on it from a religious standpoint of, again, drawing upon your well of faith, prayer, fasting, reading recitations from our prayer books, etc., are all critical resources as well.
Absolutely.
One of the things that we did benefit from back in the time where we were the most relaxed in terms of restrictions was that the Ontario government here at least allowed people to have social bubbles where you could have up to maybe 10 people or at least 2 or 3 other families that you kind of entered into a little bit of a pact where they're not members of your immediate family, but you agreed to have social gatherings just limited to within that circle. And it often worked out that your families with children that were friends, and then this gave an opportunity for people to let their kids get together, play in the backyard, or just have one-on-one nights where they could hang out with each other. And I think that those were very powerful little things that we had, unfortunately now don't have, but perhaps as things lighten up, we may get that opportunity to come back.
Inshallah. And, since this is the third week of February and, the 21st of March is Nowruz. So from Nowruz, the spring starts. So hopefully this cold weather is not going to be with us for maybe a month or maximum 2 months.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, better days are coming. And if everybody gets vaccinated, then there is hope. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And inshallah, you are going to again be seen with each other in congregation and, in social gatherings and celebrate graduations and birthdays and weddings and so on and so forth within the parameters of, whatever is permissible as per, our religion. And inshallah, better days are coming, but you do your part. You should not be influenced by those people who say that vaccine should not be taken. It's so ironic and it is so sad to share that Pakistan is the only country where we still have patients diagnosed with polio. So, and it is so unfortunate, not just for Pakistan. And I was debating the presidential debate when the question was asked to Dr. Carlson, who used to be the presidential candidate. And, since the main candidate that I would not like to even name the person, the question was asked about vaccination. And because there is some reservation in, some areas, especially in Republicans, that people should not be vaccinated. So that main person actually referred this question to Dr. Carlson, that you are the doctor and you tell us. And that person in front of all the audience, that the entire country was listening, misrepresented, despite being neurosurgeon. He said that, well, in some studies, polio vaccination has been associated with, some autistic disorders and so on and so forth. That is simply not true. It's a big lie. So is the case that, COVID vaccination, I mean, I have been vaccinated. I have had my 2 doses. And I would advocate that everybody, whenever they have the opportunity to get vaccinated, please get vaccinated. And if some person gets sick, please go to the hospital and seek treatment. Not everybody who goes to hospital dies in the emergency room, unless the person is elderly and they have so many, comorbid complications.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would also echo very strong endorsement for the vaccine. There was a question pertaining to the vaccines and whatnot, and I'll just kind of briefly sum up and basically say that, as you mentioned, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are 95% effective as per the trials, but it's useful for people to kind of understand what 95% effectiveness actually really means for this particular virus. So if you look at COVID-19, the best understanding we have of it is that probably about at most 20% of people who get the infection actually have any symptoms related to it, meaning that the 80% of the infected population are completely asymptomatic or don't have symptoms enough that they worry themselves to get checked out. So let's say 20% at most are potentially infected. And if you have a system where perhaps there is very widespread availability of testing, so that if you have any concerns, you can just immediately without barrier go and get a test, and which is probably true in most parts of the US and Canada, where you can just get a test if you need one now. That wasn't really true in the first wave when testing capacity was ramping up, but now where we have a very open policy towards testing, you can kind of get a sense of what the prevalence of COVID is in the population, and I mean of the symptomatic people, which is that we're sitting at around 3-4% test positivity rate, meaning that of every 100 tests done, only 3 or 4 are positive, and those are people who actually presumably had symptoms enough to go and get themselves a test, and 95% of the time it turns out not to be COVID, or at least a negative test. But if we assume that the so-called attack rate of the virus is, let's say, 10%, meaning that, when it's spreading around in the community, there's a 10% chance that general public will get infected by widespread community transmission, then what you really have is 90% not getting the virus, 10% are, and of those 10%, this vaccine or these vaccines reduce the incidence of what they call severe COVID by 95%. So it takes that 10% population, and 95% of those 10% get prevented from having a severe illness. In other words, they completely recover and survive. So really what you're looking at is much less than 1% of the population actually, like if we're all getting vaccinated, that would mean that much less than 1% of the population would actually end up having severe enough COVID that would take them to hospital. So I think it's we still have unanswered questions about the new variants that are coming out, the B117, etc. But that remains to be answered. From what we know, if these vaccines do carry that pretty high level of effectiveness, then it will have a very profound impact at helping us get back to our normal lives as soon as possible.
Yeah, the time is going to tell us. These South African variant or variants from England 117 are, the researchers claim that they are more easily transmissible and their infectivity is more, but hopefully, as been said by Anthony Fauci, that hopefully these vaccines, and again he said hopefully because we don't have any statistics, the time is going to prove that hopefully these vaccines will also prevent against those variants. There are some other vaccines in the pipeline as well, and that may be less effective, but at least Johnson & Johnson is claiming that those in trials, those who have received, none of them died from, and then even if people got a disease, it was mild. I would like to make another point here, that even if we are vaccinated, we still need to follow all those precautions and guidelines despite being vaccinated, like social distancing and using mask and washing our hands whenever it is needed. because by getting vaccinated, it should not give the false impression that now we have 100% bulletproof protectivity. So that is not the case. And still, if there is 95% efficacy, 5% in 5% people, it may not be, so effective. So those precautions are still important, and to reduce or minimize the transmissibility and so on and so forth.
Wonderful. So I think it's been a very fascinating discussion of very wide range of topics, and things have been touched on by us tonight. And certainly we've really benefited from your expounding on some of these topics, and we really appreciate your time and efforts tonight and contribution to this. I think that with the number of questions we've sort of received and with the viewership online, I think we can clearly sense that there's been this big unmet need, and that probably we'll be getting requests to have more such types of sessions as well. So I think without further ado, I would like to express my thanks to you for all your time tonight. It was wonderful having this conversation with you. I'm sure that there will be some additional questions, and I would suspect that they'll probably be forwarded off to the board of directors of Al Zahra or such, and then perhaps they can channel those towards you after sort of reviewing them as well.
Thank you so much, and it has been a pleasure to be with you this evening, and I really appreciate that you guys invited me, and I particularly very much like the question answer session, and it shows me that there's a great deal of need, and hopefully when the better days are going to be with us soon, then we should think about more education in terms of having workshops in our congregations and checking on those who need, and trying to reduce the stigma which is there. And mental illness should be treated like any other physical illness. And with that, I say good night to you and Khuda Hafiz, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naqvi. We wish you well, and with the